Everyone, welcome to another Mish-Mashing Battle Lounge with the 2MK team. This week is another Win 10 Battle Lounge matches week for Street Fighter, which means usually that we get a bigger variety of people, usually higher level players, coming in to lounges to, clear the requirement. You have to win matches. It is one of those times where we often suggest specifically that you go online and get a little extra practice, because there are going to be more high-level players around playing, and more high-level players around willing to play against lower-level players for longer periods. But it's not just high-level players, obviously. Everyone tries to do this. Just that most people who are trying to get better a lot spend a lot more time in the game in the first place and tend to get this through some other means. So, how do you get through this? Uppercut. Almost all the time. That is 90% of the time the requirement for a week like this. Only the best of players will not be jumping at you during this, especially if you're able to play neutral fairly well. We get to what we call the golden jump. People who have an idea of how to play quite well, but tend to get a little bit stressed out when faced by someone of approximately equivalent or even just decent skill in neutral. Obviously, if you can't beat someone in neutral, test to see if they can anti-air. But this has more to do with the current aims of players. If you're in this scenario, players tend to have a different goal, i.e. winning the match. So you're going to have to spend a lot more time working on that. Overall, during this type of week, you have to have your reactions tested. What you've trained will come up, because people will do their best to mess you up by using whatever tactics they can if they just want to get their matches. This isn't necessarily even disrespectful, they just have a certain amount of time probably to win 10 matches, and they would prefer if this happened as quickly as possible. If they weren't the type that cared about that, then they were probably playing before anyway, and probably already got it. Meaning that a lot more of what you need to understand about matches in this sort of week has to do with knowing your own defense, not so much offense or specifics. Spend a lot of time expecting that need to uppercut. Spend a lot of time expecting that your opponent will use their biggest attacks, their biggest character tricks, anything that will get them advantage. This is the time to play people and expect them to be serious. And therefore, also the time when we expect our lounge to fill up. So if you do want to join, even if not for that reason, you probably should head in fairly soon. We did start late, we'll probably be running later than usual as well. And for any given opponent on stream, we can't really say how long they will stick around, because we don't know how many matches they need to get. Levels of practice for particular players are likely to come up a lot in this lounge, but because it's mostly going to be observational and explaining little things like that doesn't matter as much. As you can see, our Abigail guest is Ultra Gold, meaning usually for us that they have enough skill sets that our general way of talking about the game doesn't matter as much. You will get the observational part described if I note anything specific that can be noted, but for the most part, this is just about, can you play at the level required? Simple as that. Let's do this. This is also the time when you have to have the highest amount of, let's call it fear, for players who seem to be level 0 on their character and have rookie status. Which is why our lounge this week, if you do want to join it, is 3 rounds first to 2 character select off, because with character select on, this sort of thing just gets a little too messy. It really helps if you expect your opponent to be pulling out all the stops to know which character they're going to be playing before the match, so you can look quickly at your notes if you have any, or just mentally prepare yourself in some way.
Fight.
Kansuki Dynasty understands this matchup fairly well, but is still going to come down to the same thing. Time to uppercut. Unfortunately for Karine, she only has uppercuts when she has meter, technically. The easy way to deal with this on Karine is to simply not play so much footsies. Get back out of the way, get back out of the situation when you don't know what's going on. Give yourself enough space to actually fight. Why? Because if you don't have any meter, you're going to get jumped on. So you just need to get enough to get the meter. Once you've got the meter, you can play more normally. But this is also important because she doesn't have a lot of ways of turning that meter into big damage on the uppercuts. Still, she can at least get to this point of expecting that she now has the capacity to move forward. She now has the capacity to play footsies, and when the opponent does jump, she just has to be ready for the uppercut. The question is whether or not this will actually be a thing.
Final round.
Depending on your other skills, you probably won't absolutely need to do this, but as you go further and further into the match, it's going to become more and more important to uppercut, or whatever is necessary. The opponent is not likely to give you a lot of chances to win once they actually realize, oh wait, I'm not doing that well, this is actually hard. Meaning that it's easy to lose your cool and therefore get beaten up.
You lose.
This is a core aspect of nearly every fighting game. Whether or not the way that your opponent tends to get in on you is to jump, there's always something like this. There's always some reaction you need to have. And even in this game, when it goes from jumping as the main thing, it becomes dashing. Eventually you get to the point where your opponent has to be checked in their dash, not jumped on. So now we have some meter. It's possible to play neutral, possible to play footsies. One of the main problems that comes up is that once you've gotten to that point, you may have managed to distract yourself entirely from what was required to play footsies. If you forget your options, or your opponent pushes you too hard mentally, you're just not going to be able to switch back to doing the things you're supposed to do until you're better at the game overall. This is actually something that we teach through our Clawbot, who we have just updated this Sunday. Clawbot has been updated to give him the ability to use the Sky High Claw, and this can help you out in understanding the move. The character is just flatly better now, but I don't expect him to become popular super fast anyway. One observational point that probably got dropped again because of too many things to think about is that when Abigail does giant flip, he is actually plus, and you therefore don't get to do anything. You can backdash out of it most of the time though, as his animations don't tend to lead to him being able to hit anything before you can get out of his way. If he spaced it even close to correctly, for his other plans, just backdash out of it. But it looks like that particular opponent doesn't seem to feel the need to do it. So with that switch, we are on to a Platinum Alex instead.
Let's do this.
I'm not likely to have a lot to say here, primarily because the person fighting the Alex is themselves an Alex. So let's just watch what DeWolf comes up with. It's probably going to be, at least theoretically, equal to anything I would have to say. Even if it's not mechanically easy for him to do it, the plans, most likely, are going to be those you'd expect from someone who understands this character.
Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight! Alex wins. Round one. Fight!
Looks like you could use more training.
Round two. Fight! Alex wins.
Most of us suffer from a specific problem when facing our own character played by a higher level person. The standard thing we encounter
Let's do this.
is the fact that we play the character. If you're probably around silver or just below gold, You probably play your character more so by just doing whatever your opponent won't stop. The problem with players of the Platinum level is that they actually know which of those things they need to space properly. And they have a fairly good idea, because they've played long enough to actually get those things beaten, what will beat them and when to do them. And when they notice that you aren't doing the thing, they're much less scared or much less likely to vary what they're doing than a lower level player. Basically, if you never V-reversal Alex off you, for example, the response of a silver player will probably not have anything to do with that. They won't even be thinking about the fact that, oh, they aren't getting V-reversal. They'll figure eventually you'll do something, or they won't have the skills to space themselves to just continually get pressure. A Platinum level player can set this up almost all the time against lower level players, and possibly even against higher level players. It's just that eventually the higher level players have some solution, be it V-reversal or armored moves, or even sometimes checking Alex out of certain things with jab, etc. They have built up methods to resolve the issue in some other way. But this is equaled by the fact that the Alex player, in this case, probably just has the correct spacing and correct movement to just continually be able to do it, especially if you don't stop it. This is something that you can see also in the difference between high silver and lower bronze players as well. If you are in lower bronze and you find that your opponent is just doing the same thing over and over and over, it's most likely because they have realized that you don't know how to stop it yet. And even if they would want to give you a chance, it's so ingrained, often so automatic to try to move to this space, try to hit this button. They're not necessarily doing it because, oh, you are super susceptible, although technically that's correct. It's simply that someone else would have stopped them. It's the best thing they can do with their character under most circumstances. If they're not being pushed off, they keep doing it. And if you can't push them off, then they keep doing it. If you defend really well for a long time, often the opponent will decide, oh, I probably need to open you up, and actually change. But if your defense falls apart occasionally, they will get some damage and move back to doing the same thing again, because that's the good timing for it.
You lose.
It's not really so bad to be in that state where you are just doing your best to muddle around with things. But you do have to understand what's happening. Most of the time, when you are playing at that level, your opponent isn't really trying to do anything. They've probably trained a long time against multiple characters. They have some idea of the matchup, because it's difficult to get too far beyond gold without a lot of matchup knowledge. Even if you just remember it all naturally in your head, it's probably there. Once you've got all that, you just automatically play the matchup. Especially if there's a way to play it against people who don't know the character that well. And you think, well, why would you do that? Because people play lots of characters. People play lots of random things in the gold ranks and battle lounges. There are a lot of people who have basically reached gold and then decided they were never playing ranked again. That sort of thing. And those gold players tend to match up with each other and play lots and lots of games. If you've ever checked, we fight people who fought 30,000, 25,000 games. And depending on their mindset toward the game, they can be completely dominating or approximately normal but with good tricks. They still, however, play the matchup, or whatever they perceive the matchup to be, and their idea of it can't be that bad, otherwise they would probably just lose to that character all the time. And this would often result in them dropping in ranks. If your character is common,
You win.
expect people to know how to stop most of the things, and to know which of their things they get to keep doing.
Round 1. Fight.
This is often compounded by the fact that going from bronze to silver is around the point where you start to think a lot. But going from gold to platinum is around the spot where you stop thinking so much. Either because you've practiced so long that you don't really need thought to do certain things, or because you've made that mental breakthrough that tells you, you know what, I think too much and it's not getting me anything, so I should stop. It's not easy to get the feeling that that is okay to do, to just stop thinking and make decisions based on instinct or muscle memory or just nothing in particular. There are people who just don't make decisions, they just play randomly. But most of us are taught that if we want to get good, we have to be at least somewhat thinking so that we can learn things about the opponent, and this is mostly correct. Understanding what your opponent is capable of decides how you approach the matchup. But once you've fought matchups enough, you just do it. Bots are intended to help you get past that, actually, to get to a point where you fought quote-unquote the matchup, especially if you come up with full tactics based on things rather than just going, okay, I have learned a couple punishes or whatever. Most of our bots, they will either tell you outright this bot is a good simulation of the character. In fact, they're directly marked as matchup. Some of them are not. Bots on our website, that is at 2-mk.org, bots that are not marked with matchup are usually not intended to help you learn the matchup. They often tell you what to do. In some cases it's play the CPU for a while, or there's no way to learn this matchup directly, so just get used to all the moves and think about how you play the game, etc. Sometimes the matchup really is more or less just can you react to this, in which case the bot is still functionally correct. But familiarity is a good thing. And if you can't get it from fighting your friends, we continue to offer a different way to get it. We've actually been testing, now that different people have Championship Edition, how consistent some of the bots we consider to be difficult are. So far, doing fairly good. We haven't found any bots that made us think, you can't input this. It's functionally impossible. We got lucky the first time. We know that our Mika bot is somewhat like this, but the easier parts, the easier ways to input Mika bot still give you most of the things Mika does. She's just not as fabulous. We are to Lucia. Our Lucia bot has also recently been input on at least one other system, and it was a little iffy, but I have to do a lot of cross-referencing to be sure about this right now. The hard part of this bot actually is inputting the cancel to rough chase correctly. So that may come up in this match, as we don't currently have a bot that cancels the rough chase easily enough. This is bad if you therefore don't spend time trying to figure out how to deal with rough chase without letting her hit you. As in, yeah, easy way to do that is, oh, I know that move, I'll block. But you don't really want to block. If you have a different solution, you should use it. Not many characters do though, so it doesn't come up. What she does teach, the bot specifically, while not quite being Lucia matchup level, is a lot of how to deal with Lucia's ground game and how she tends to go for lows. Lucia going for lows as much as she does means it's very difficult to move away from her in certain scenarios. And she does well with this police character thing. While she doesn't beat Karine in footsies, she beats Karine in the damage part of footsies, i.e. Lucia confirms into better things than Karine does, and Karine doesn't get to play the heavy damage game against this character. She can play a very, very dominant game against Lucia, but it has to be based on something other than, hey, can I walk forward and flip your legs? Because Lucia has a ton of counters to this. You can see here, for example, that as long as Dynasty continues to use the approach of trying to hit with the crouch medium kick, which is basically her default, Lucia ends up having too much advantage. Similarly, if you approach too quickly, this happens as well. The goal generally is to force Lucia to play footsies to a point where she has to try to get in. It's not like Gil, you don't have to whiff punish this character. But you have to make her want to do something. And Karine is not really a character who generally does that. Karine is good at playing all sorts of games, but she's not good necessarily at making opponents feel, I need to do something now, other than with the same crouch medium kick, stand medium kick things. So Lucia basically has counters to everything Karine does to make you want to do things. Meaning that this aggressive style that Katsuki Dynasty is playing now is likely to lose purely because it's aggressive. So far, 50% of her opponent's damage has been, I go in on your wake up. But like I said, wound is practically made of damage. One thing that helps here is the same thing that helps in, obviously, the only similar matchup in the game, Birdie. There's a spacing that Karine can stand at, and often use her light Rasenha to make the opponent not want to do certain things. But Karine doesn't naturally stand at that space most of the time, and it's just within most of Lucia's ranges. The fortunate thing for this is actually that Rasenhas have good knockdowns, so you remove the problem that the rest of this is doing. Specifically, that you get to push on the opponent when you get the knockdown, because the knockdown you used is when you can actually do something with it. Unfortunately, our Karine does not necessarily have a whole lot of other ways to play or other ideas for this matchup, meaning that it's going to end up being a lot like this. That's not to say that this is not something, but you can see how the stress aspect of this gets too high in order to make the actual closeout. Unfortunately, it's difficult sometimes to count whether or not the opponents are going to stick around for long, because generally you don't know how many matches they've already managed to win. But in this case, we can probably expect, I'd say maybe 1 or 2 more sets at least, counting this one obviously. I'd expect 2. Nakali has a much easier time of this than Karine does. But Nikali has to actually whiff punish Lucia, unlike Curry. And whiff punishing Lucia with Nikali is a lot of work. Thankfully, his crouch heavy punch and crouch heavy kick are both really good, which gives him something close to an advantage in this matchup. She often wants to go for lows, but Nikali is often defending lows, so it doesn't matter. His capacity to use stand heavy kick when she backs off, and his general benefits from the spacing that he ends up at if he manages to throw her, tend to help out a lot. Lucia therefore generally wants to stay closer to make Nikali more nervous. But this is also easy to get dealt with because he just has to stomp for the most part. Most of the time a heavy stomp is not going to get beaten out by anything Lucia has in line. And if it is, he has enough other options that it's not going to be a blow up most of the time. Even with her multi-hit projectiles, he has a good advantage, and she takes too long to set up her flipper flame, and she'll just get size mode. So Lucia really does want to be close in most matches where the Nikali player has the reactions to deal with everything else she does. She benefits from her throw spacing much better though. You can see it right there. 2 medium punches, a handstand heavy kick, and Lucia is out of her good range already. You can also delay the speed on that to hopefully frame trap her, or maybe even bait her into doing her uppercut. And even if you don't, actually, she doesn't do that much damage when she does it, so you don't really care.
Lucia wins.
However, once Lucia actually is close, Nikali has a couple of problems. One, how do you get away from this character? Like most characters of this type, you can't really escape her, and Nikali's backdash is not so great that he'll get out of things. He actually benefits a lot from a forward jump over her head when she's extremely close, as she's just not a character who really easily makes use of this. And since Nikali can change the arc of his jump, he can come back down much faster rather than actually going all the way over her head. But this is again mostly about when he's close. But there you see, medium punch, heavy kick. Mostly that's a matter of timing. It doesn't work every time, but the ability to delay it helps out a lot against Lucia. Here's the whiff punish, and the forward jump. So overall this is going relatively well. But it causes Lucia to change to a form of footsies where your instinct has to be better than the Lucia player, which is hard. Nikali's speed and his buttons don't really work out as well for the same purposes. He doesn't get to use a lot of his options in terms of specials, and unlike most people, he can't actually just punish with his command grab because it's actually 8 frames instead of 5. So, you can already see the flow. But Cosmic Wolf is holding out pretty good here, and already knows some of this, but Cosmic Wolf, as you will note, is the person who had Lucia bought first, and spent a lot of time understanding the character as a whole, because, you know, in case it was going to work out playing a little bit. Yep, there we go again. But, unfortunately, the jump did not go as intended. Ooh, dropped. Still, that was totally deserved for their side. And therefore, it is over.
Lucia wins.
This is not a character we get to see that often, so we do end up discussing some options. But most likely we're gonna head back to observation. The question is whether or not we will be seeing Lucia versus Nikali again, and it looks like we will. The wolf tends to have a better sense of when to move than Cosmic Wolf does. Cosmic Wolf has strong defense and less need to get in, which can work out really well. But in terms of a high level Lucia who is aware enough of the matchup, aware enough of the flow that they naturally try to stay close instead of using most of her other tools, what is probably a bigger advantage is having that good sense of when to move. Specifically, when to do the forward jump, when to do the dive kick out of the forward jump,
Round one.
and when to backdash instead of trying to actually move in. But the rest of it is pretty simple. The stomp at the right time is almost always going to be effective. The crouch medium, stand, heavy kick is almost always going to be effective. It's not the hardest of matchups to think about, it's hard to execute. This is one of the few characters where Lucia struggles to actually find the space to get her damage. But this is mostly countered by the fact that once she does get into the space, she does a lot of damage at once, and generally. That's a weakness of Necalli, even though it's hard to explain as a weakness. Necalli isn't a character who deals well with characters who explosively do damage when he's close to having to trigger, because he has less life to use his trigger with. Whether or not you should actually use reversal as a result of this is hard to judge. One of the easier ways to decide is, does Lucia have V-meter yet? Or are you about to give her V-meter? In this case, for example, she doesn't really have it yet, so Necalli doesn't need to activate it. He can decide whether or not he wants to use the V-reversal to keep her from getting to open him up and converting into all that huge damage. There's that jump. But Slipper Flame, good timing.
Lucia wins. Round one. Fight.
Normally, a player at this point starts to use the Flipper Flame simply to check whether or not you can actually do the correct timing on Seismo, for example. Or they jump more to test whether or not you can actually do your anti-airs. That's the win condition for most people in this situation. Set up something, test your ability, because your ability to play the matchup is at least somewhat demonstrated. And their job is now to figure out what they can do to mess with your head, to break your expectations, or put more stress on you so that you drop that aspect of it, so you don't just mechanically play the matchup near perfectly. As you can see, one of Necalli's bigger problems is that he doesn't actually want to put her at the range she gets at when he throws her off. But he can't necessarily afford to go for the command grab as a punish either. It depends a lot on the player you're fighting. If the player you're fighting is the type who generally blocks, you can sneak in the command grab every now and again just to like get better spacing on the ground. This combination is much worse for Lucia than most things. She does have super though, so... Is it gonna work? Of course it's gonna work. So that was, as most people would consider, predictable.
Lucia wins. Let's do this.
Do the crime, you do the time.
Harmony. Round one. Fight. All. Cryokinesis. Cryokinesis. All.
This matchup is extremely mechanically taxing.
Round two.
Almost entirely, this is decided by how well you can physically do a specific thing. On both sides. In Lucia's case, it's how well she can get flames over Gil's projectiles. And in Gil's case, it's almost entirely, can he moonsault in the timings where she has thrown flame but he has not thrown a fireball? And use the specifics of his guiding, his ability to guide his moonsault to get into a position he wants so that he can do something he wants right after. You'll note that neither player even seems to want to play from close range, even when they get the option to do so. Meaning that the match often resets to that sort of mechanical skill test.
Final round. Fight.
Gil does have the option, however, of using his forward heavy kick and stand heavy kick at ranges that Lucia can't easily match. The problem with both these moves is that she can use her lows if she's really confident that they're coming and still get something. Overall though, a lot of this can be outright read from the perspective of this is happening now because of this thing happening. Similar to matches like Bison versus Blanca or similar, where you know what's happening, the only thing that's really deciding whether or not it will turn out well is your physical ability. This is a little bit easier to do for Gil when he uses his other V trigger though. Kennedy is also easier when he uses his other V skill. Lucia is not a character who cares about his V skill or V trigger too that much, and in the places where they shine, i.e. setting up situations at close range, you have to be fairly dominant in skill over your opponent for it to come up a lot. But when it comes to V triggers at least, that decision usually can be made. Specifically, that if you are not even in skill with your opponent, unless you plan to use it to practice, you probably aren't going to benefit from it. Why? Because you've lost a tool you can threaten with or make your opponent worry about later, meaning that they'll probably just get a big life lead and then attack anyway and not care whether or not you actually pull it off. Lucia's style of play also doesn't often lead to her making herself vulnerable enough that many of Gil's more tricky stuff works out, so he ends up back in the same situation as G. Lots of meter and not too much to do with it, except confirming the super for a kill. This is not a bad aim to have though. There's definitely timings where that's all he really needs.
Final round. Fight.
This, however, is Gil's probably worst situation, where his best option is actually just to reversal her off. I believe that makes this bring back Remy's 10th win.
Lucia wins.
So we'll see if they're hanging around for the fight money, or because they just wanted to play with us today. Yeah, that's the 10. No, they're staying. Sontier is not one of our players who has had basically any experience with Lucia. At least not from the bot perspective. And this is not an easy matchup for Akuma, because he has to get out of a specific loop she does, but whether or not he can get out of the loop has more to do with the spacing and the opponent's trigger timing than anything else, which is rough on someone who is trying to deal with certain things. He can, mostly though, choose between parry and backdash. As soon as Lucia gets close, that's basically Akuma's options. He can parry, and he can backdash. Anything else tends to lead to Lucia winning outright because all of her buttons outrange his ever so slightly. It's not that Akuma can't play neutral. It's that once Lucia starts hitting buttons, he doesn't really have much other than ES Uppercut that stops her with certainty. The parry is almost always a good idea, but executing that while she's in the middle of her strings, especially against a really aware Lucia player, is very difficult. Still, as always, we more so mention the way to do something as just theory. Whether or not you can do it is not really relevant. Understanding what there is to be done, though, does help. That is the other reason why it's not helpful. The parry is important in this matchup, mostly because one, it gives Akuma more movement to work with, which then allows him to reversal her off if he feels like it.
Gotta respect the law.
And basically when Akuma does other hits, he has to confirm that they hit and go into combos from them that go for knockdowns, because if he doesn't land knockdown combos, it's usually bad. But if he confirms when he was actually too slow or something, and or Lucia spaced herself correctly, then he gets blocked, and Lucia does a lot of damage on a relatively squishy character.
Round 1.
The parry therefore helps because it provides lots of different things. It provides a knockdown, it provides V-meter, it provides correct spacing for situations that he would prefer. And again, Lucia is not a character whose moves or flow are very fast. She doesn't have the greatest walk speed, and she doesn't have the greatest forward movement on most of her normals. Meaning that you can afford to do longer, slower moves in the gaps if you are confident a gap is coming. Similar to Nakali and the stomp or the jump out. If you think Lucia is going to try to keep going, but she needs a little time, most of the time just using that style of move doesn't really break the bank. You don't end up getting messed up too much for it. Now obviously, if your opponent eventually starts to recognize this and expect the move, you will get hurt for it. That's how fighting games work. For the most part, you don't get to do things for free if your opponent is very aware. But playing that level of flow in this matchup does take some effort from Lucia's side.
Round 2.
So it makes up for the fact that Akuma basically can't throw fireballs against his character. As for his meter, ESD movement tends to help a lot. It does not seem to, mostly from my observation in other matches, work in the same space as the parry or backdash options, but it does do some stuff. Sunter has been practicing V-reversal on Larabot for basically this sort of situation. Sometimes you just don't have the option to face off with an opponent because you have to get them off you. But there's a conversion. Oh no, apparently they dropped it. What would have been a normally strong judgment, specifically that when you're normally fighting bronze players, if they drop something, their mindset immediately goes to, I want my kill, I'm finishing now. Platinum players tend toward the opposite side. If they drop something, most of them take a breath, most of them stop and recenter themselves, and most of them don't go for the pressure off of it because they're too knowledgeable. They know, I dropped this combo, my opponent is probably going to mash, it's not going to help me.
Let's do this.
This matchup we know reasonably well. We'll see what Bring Back Remy's take on it is, but don't expect me to have too much to say.
I'll show you the divide in our class.
Round 1. Fight!
One important thing to remember is that Shotos are actually good at jumping, which brings us back to the theme of the stream. Time to uppercut. But of course, at this level you're facing someone who will attempt to make you play the ground game long enough that they can distract you from the fact that you uppercut. We have a specific way of training this though. It's actually trained against our Lara bot as well, because she tends to vary her spacing and is easier to input than Mika, honestly. Normally this is done by having the player play through regular neutral. They don't have to like do any Lara bot points or anything, but it's not quite a cabin either. Play through regular neutral against Lara bot, but constantly call out either verbally or in your own head the correct anti-air for your character for Lara's current spacing. Just all the time. Every time Lara moves, rethink what is the anti-air for this spacing. Eventually, you can get good enough at this that it entirely speeds up your processing of the game. It also causes something interesting, specifically that when you have found yourself in a place where your opponent has just managed to move out of the thing they're supposed to do, as in, they managed to respace themselves so that you no longer know the exact anti-air. You had one in mind a moment ago, you jumped after walking forward or something and you flinch. You know, don't try to anti-air, because you are going to hit the wrong one. If you knew which one to hit, you would hit it. If you knew which one to hit though, you would also have said it in your head a moment before they jumped, and jumps take a long time. This is separate from the difficulty of directly connecting something you say to something you're prepared to do. That can be a different reason why you don't succeed at this type of thing, or generally anti-airing in general. But understanding it helps a lot. And as I said, Shotos are good at jumping, so you do have to be able to do this. It's not the long zoning jump where they're trying to fake you into thinking that they won't make it, but then they hit you at the max range, though either. It's the standard, I neutral jump sometimes, I jump over your head at specific spaces really well. The entire deal. This is partially why we do have you do the initial phases of this without the constantly advancing opponent. If you want to train this without, like, oh, Lara bot, this sounds like a bit much. Ryu Captain 22 has effectively that precise purpose. If you feel like you don't know the spacings, that's the one to use. And Captain 22 is honestly not that hard to input. Making a good Ryu bot that also does Kata 22 is difficult, but the actual Ryu that does Kata 22 stuff is not so hard. Depending on your character, this may work out poorly for you in one way, specifically that you react to your opponent going into the air rather than to their forward jump. This can be a big problem for some people. So you can judge whether or not you play the type of character where pressing your anti-air button in response to a neutral jump from a Shoto is a bad thing or not. Most of the time, if you play an uppercut character and you are primed to do the uppercut, you may have to uppercut differently, or you may have to use your heavy uppercut sometimes.
Let's do this.
Necalli, this matchup stops being easy the moment you get to the top end of gold. Because the Ryu players don't have the same aim anymore. It's easy to deal with Ryu players when their goals are to jump from as soon as they are able to jump and to throw fireballs. Necalli has strong counters to both these things, constantly. He barely even has to work. It's just a question of if he times it right or executes the uppercut. But this is a different situation. This is where Cosmic Wolf's strength shines. Not being too committed to doing any specific thing often means that at least you don't die immediately. One of the bigger problems is actually seen right there. When Ryu is moving forward at a particular spacing and timing, he tends to react to things Necalli does by jumping. And Necalli has very, very few responses to this. In fact, to the point where I would suggest to any Necalli player who is trying to understand how this matchup works and doesn't feel like they understand it after it starts to get hard, simply do this. Whenever you do anything to carry you forward to try to hit Ryu, and you feel like you fail, hold up. That's it. Just hold up on the controller. The Ryu player will either uppercut, which usually implies that they were thinking about the ground game and expecting you to jump, or you'll meet them in the air in some form, which means that they were thinking about how to get in on you when you left yourself open. So yeah, press forward heavy punch, and jump. Stand heavy kick, jump straight up. Even if you dash and don't know what else to do, probably jump straight up. It particularly helps if you have Necalli's V-Trigger 1 to add into this, because then you don't have to jump, you can just hit the V-Trigger button. But that does take a while to start up, so... The other reason this helps is because most of Necalli's moves don't leave him negative enough for Ryu to get anything off of the buttons he presses. If Necalli gets hit while trying to jump,
Ryu wins.
It almost always causes Ryu's combos to drop. Air resets are not one of Ryu's strong points as a character, and he doesn't have a lot of really good juggle things. Most of the things that would make you think, oh, I've got this, involve him dashing, which can work, but dashing into what? Even if it doesn't help you directly, the very thought that, hey, I failed to move forward, I can't do anything now, I should just jump. You could eventually go, well, jumping is a terrible idea, why would I do that? But you will at least have reached the point where you don't try to do anything else. Where your thought process is, oh, I know when I've failed my advance, so I shouldn't do anything. And as you can see, Necalli, as mentioned in Lucia matchup, gets a lot out of that double crouch medium punch spacing. Most players who go up against Necalli actually have to be able to react to what comes after that move in multiple ways, or Necalli will almost always get away with it, whatever it is. Just spacing wise, there's a certain set of characters that does really well against it, and a certain kind of characters that where you really should learn to like counter the man. That's new. Also cool.
Ryu wins.
This is also a match in which Necalli's view reversal helps quite a lot because he doesn't really want to fight Ryu at close range anyway. And a lot of Ryu's pressure against Nikali, because Nikali tends to push him to spaces like that, mean that you can V-reversal him off fairly easily. This isn't to say that you won't get baited into doing this. You shouldn't just immediately do it though. As long as you don't make the V-reversal one of your primary game plans, it's difficult for Ryu to get too much out of this, because he eventually gets to the point where he wants to dash and throw you, which is what you would most likely see from Diamond Ryu players or High Platinum Ryu players that have specialized in the character. They're looking for that moment to dash and get the throw on Nikali. But because Nikali's game plan in this matchup at higher level involves at least some backdashing or really fast walk speed that allows him to walk out of Ryu things, similar to how he could just jump, you don't really get terribly torn apart by this. So the Wolf's problem is more likely to be that he won't know what to do on offense and is likely to get beat up while trying it. As mentioned, the difference in their style is notable enough that you can probably predict how this will go. In matches like this, Ryu player is often very confident because as long as Nikali's not defending, Ryu doesn't have a lot to worry about. If things get dire, he will V-reversal or uppercut. He's not a character who's really in a lot of danger from Nikali being close. He's in danger when he wants to attack Nikali and has been pushed to one of the unfortunate positions that doesn't really let him do much. Therefore, this comes down to, can the Wolf keep the opponent at those spaces? That V skill is much better for dealing with a lot of things, and is capable of forcing Ryu to have to dash. But since he can't dash over the same move, he has to care a lot more. Not quite very well, but it of course does the job.
Ryu wins.
This of course spins us back to the same place though. The optimal response to this from the Ryu side? Jump. There's no reason to play footsies with someone who doesn't really want to play footsies in that way, and who has so many counters to everything you would otherwise do. Just get to the correct spacing and jump. Because Nikali's uppercut does go relatively far forward, without being able to cross-cut, and there are certain spaces where you can jump, so it's difficult to cross-cut DP him. It's rough overall. Meaning that Nikali ends up playing a game where he doesn't really want to have to uppercut. He's constantly in at least slight danger from the attempt, but still has to uppercut. And since Ryu has almost all the good options for jumping in the game that you can possibly want, there's really no way around it. Except, we've looped again. At that point, Nikali becomes able to use his own neutral jump heavy kick to deal with the situation. So even though you may see things that look like interplay of the same style of moves over and over, they're actually being used for different things. But there's Ryu's jump, perfect, and drop the combo this time. clinch, but could have been done earlier if there were uppercuts involved.
Final round. Fight.
This ability to stay off the ground is actually helpful to Necalli in this matchup. While Ryu has a lot of good options for jumping in on standing people, he's not quite so great at dealing with air-to-airs at long range or when the opponent is not aiming to do much. Particularly not on a character with invincible moves to beat out his air reset. But Wolf has basically just given up the key to the rest of this match. Specifically, that even if he wasn't going to get beaten up by losing the rest of his health in one combo, activating the trigger in this case when the match really didn't rely too much on Necalli's walk speed or his V-trigger activation meant that there was no more V-reversal, which means that even if it had been fine, the reaction from Ryu would have been, okay, good, I get pressure now, until open up into big damage.
Let's do this.
This match is relatively easy. It mostly depends on whether or not Gil picks the right V-trigger. Ryu doesn't really get to jump and be sure of himself. He doesn't really get to throw fireballs and be sure of himself. He doesn't get to Tatsu over fireballs and be sure of himself. Really, Ryu doesn't get to be sure of himself in this matchup in any way. If you're super good at it, you can walk up to Gil and do things. Usually hitting stand heavy punch is really effective. But like nearly everyone else in the game, Ryu's only real options in this matchup are to get to a position where Gil needs to hit buttons and whiff punish the buttons. He's not the greatest at this though. And he doesn't get his really good combos off of any of his whiff punishes. That may have changed though, and I feel as if we're likely to see.
Round one.
So let's see if we see whiff punish style play or if it's just going to be a zoning showdown. But even if it was a zoning showdown, eventually it would shift. So one good thing here is that Gil is one of those characters where if he wants to throw projectiles to stop Ryu from jumping, he loses the ability to throw the projectile that stops Ryu from dashing or otherwise approaching. Still, this isn't really a terrible thing. Ryu's dash is fast, but it's not that fast. Gil does mostly still get to do things. His back heavy kick is the better solution to a lot of these things though, because Ryu will eventually jump, and Gil's back heavy kick is among the better anti-airs against the Shoto style jump.
Round two. Fight.
Ryu ends up hitting jump medium punch, I think, in order to make this work. Or he just gets blocked because he must do the zoning jump and Gil doesn't care. Once Gil has landed an attack, it makes Ryu's life even harder because now you have retribution fireballs. This doesn't really change the fact that Ryu's better option in this matchup is to jump, because you have to count on the fact that Gil will not be able to anti-air. If you've played a character that has to use multiple situational anti-airs at a high level, you already know the stress of this. There's simply not enough ways for Gil to directly control Ryu's position on the screen to be sure that the anti-air is going to be correct. And Ryu has enough deceptive moves to change this. If it were Kage, Gil would probably have a clearer, sure fire method of doing this. But as you can see, The crouch heavy punch is not actually an effective anti-air late enough into a Ryu jump.
You win.
Heavy punch and medium punch tend to beat it, or at least trade in a way that doesn't lead to much. So,
Round one. Fight.
one thing you can count on is that eventually, Gil will have to become stressed out by this matchup. There are a lot of decisions to be made constantly, and just pure decision fatigue alone could mess with you. This is easier once Gil has the life lead. And doubly easier once Gil has the corner, but even then, player confidence makes a big difference. Part of the reason why the corner is so helpful is that Gil gets to set his own terms in terms of which anti-air he needs to use. He stands exactly where he has the optimal anti-air, and then he just knows he can do it. Ryu also doesn't have a lot of good options at the range Gil can do his back heavy kick from, so cornering Ryu is probably among his better options, to the point where it might be worth using meter to armor through Hadoukens just to get a big corner carry. This is part of what makes the character at least functional in this matchup in ways other than letting Ryu control it. Get him to the corner, and you can just stand where you like, leaving most players with only the option of, okay, can I distract you long enough that you won't react to my dash? Which is a reasonable way to play, but it is hard enough that you have to think about it. But that is super unsafe. Oh, no finish.
Final round. Fight.
That is one good way to look at it. Once Gil has gotten to Ryu to the corner, now it has become the canon matchup for Gil, which isn't necessarily good, but it's not terribly hard either. It's just a matter of deciding when should I hit forward heavy kick. And that is why you can't afford to do this. Once Ryu is on fire, Gil gets massive amounts of damage off of that back heavy kick anti-air. The last report from Omni Rabbit that actually faced Gil was that when Gil had a meter, it was basically 600 health. And 600 health is a big deal in this game. Even if Ryu's not on fire though, it's not a terrible thing to do to just go for this anti-air when you're in the corner, because all of the resets will still lead to advantage for Gil. Not necessarily advantage where he gets to delete Ryu and do massive amounts of health damage. In fact, a lot of the time one's goal might not even be to attack more, but simply to keep control of the situation and possibly, depending on the opponent's health level, make some related decisions. This is the match that Suntier can like, but does not always get to play. High-level Ryu versus Akuma matches are mostly instinct. The problem in this case being, if you were not aware, for those who play on pad, and I think for many who play on stick, the uppercut motion is actually a completely different thing on either side. This may seem a little bit weird to say, but for most of us, we think about doing our quarter circle forward motions the same way. The brain mostly can throw a fireball the same way on either side of the screen. For many people though, the uppercut is actually a different motion.
Fight!
Meaning that effectiveness in this matchup is often related to which side of the screen one is on when you're low level. It can be worth it just to jump over your opponent on a knockdown, but this does tend to show a high level player, if they notice it happens too much, they might understand this enough to show the weak point. One good way, as you're now seeing, to deal with this specific type of Ryu jump though is to have Akuma's V with skill 2 ready. If you want to focus on the other part of this matchup and not specifically be stuck constantly worrying about when Ryu's going to jump, you can use that to help out. Another thing Akuma benefits from is the ability to do light demon flip and punch projectiles. He can do this at full screen, and he can mix it up with other demon flips. This forces Ryu to jump or use very specific options. That, on the other hand, was probably bad in the sense of being frustrating, but honestly, crosscut DP would not have been easier, so it doesn't matter. You see there the main problem with using this option though. Shotos tend to have at least some way out of it based on their jump timing, meaning that there is still a spacing at which there is some vulnerability in this move. Akuma's good option in this space is similar to what he uses against Zangief, but not for the same reason. Akuma can move forward in this matchup with his stand heavy kick, but not in the same sense where it is aiming to get to a point of hitting it so that Zangief has to expect something. In the Ryu matchup, it basically comes down to, has my opponent stopped throwing fireballs? And if they have stopped throwing fireballs,
Round one.
the extremely long animation of Akuma's stand heavy kick tends to result in being able to keep a Ryu from dashing or doing certain moves. Question is, did you manage to get them to not throw the fireballs? Specifics as to how that's achieved, I really couldn't tell you. If there is a reason for Ryu to not throw fireballs in this matchup, it's not very clear. Aside from maybe them being demon flipped over in ways you don't want. That's reasonable as a concept, but not really something that one tends to spend a lot of time worrying about. Unfortunately, Ryu's not really a popular enough character in certain forms of high-level play that we see this matchup a lot. So I don't have a lot of data for it. But if you have gotten to stop throwing projectiles, consider your stand heavy kick because it keeps Ryu from doing certain things. Most of the time, whether or not you hit the second heavy kick is up to you. But there are spacings where you don't want to hit both of them, obviously, because you'll get whiff punished. And because the main benefit to the move is that actually it takes really long to animate and therefore needs a lot of forward movement that you might want to use, means that your push point as to whether or not to use it is one of those difficult decisions to make. You can't rely on it too much, but it's generally better than, say, throwing fireballs or attempting to beat Ryu by demon flipping in. If you want to move forward, and you don't want to walk, and you definitely don't want to dash, just use it to cover some space. Basically, the moment where they both decide to dash at the same time If the players were to think, I don't want to dash, then Akuma wins, because they both hit a button to move them forward. Akuma's is much less able to be whiff punished, and Ryu's is good for things regarding checking people who are dashing at him. As in, Ryu wins if Akuma decides to dash. Akuma wins basically either way. He doesn't get a lot of damage, but he doesn't get hurt. In this case, our platinum guest has moved on. And we are back to at least half of the usual suspects. This may result in some character switches, but not from
Round one.
most people.
Fight!
Lessons have obviously said many things about these matchups. The stream is probably going to be a little quieter from here on.
I'll admit that you have some skill.
Round two. Fight! You win! Round one. Fight! Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight! You lose. Let's do this. Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight! Final round. Fight. Nekali wins. Round one. Fight. Round two. Fight. Akuma wins. Round one. Fight. Round two. Fight. Akuma wins. Let's do this.
Although Codybot is one that Santir spends quite a lot of time training against, the timings and spaces of a player's jump are not really the same. Getting points off anti-airing Codybot is hard though, so technically it's similar experience, except that understanding that you are able to win or lose through it is a little bit harder. Specifically, there's a timing at which Cody becomes dangerous by jumping, and you mostly want to beat him up before then. Akuma does mostly have the capacity to do this though. The main problem being, Cody players tend to block on wake up. When they don't, it often goes poorly. So if all this comes down to is, once again, time to uppercut, and how to get the maximum life lead benefit off of a knockdown, unfortunately it becomes somewhat like the G matchup. Akuma spends a lot of time figuring out how to best use meter. And honestly, the match is more or less decided by that. The more meter Akuma must use up in order to play it normally, the more likely Cody is to win. This looks like it's probably somewhat laggy though, so it's hard to say. Yeah, I'm gonna assume it's just laggy. Which means that most likely our Cody is on the other side of the coast. But we are getting closer to the end of the stream. There's not much more to say, especially if Santir isn't going to get to face this particular opponent. This is one of those cases where the lounge whale, while it may stay on for a while longer, since we did start late and we are going on later, we're basically already past the point where it matters. The lounge is most likely closing soon, and as you can see we're down to 4 people, which means you can definitely join, especially join right away, and probably get some matches in. But if you're looking for the long haul, or coming to get your 10 Battle Lounge matches, you might not get them all. On the opposite side of the spectrum, this is not a heavy Cody experience. While Codybot is indirectly available to Kansuku Dynasty, she doesn't spend a lot of time facing him because Karine doesn't have a lot of Cody problems other than, oh, I can't anti-air this character. Her neutral jump heavy kick is oddly effective though, because most of Cody's attack vectors do tend to like get resolved by it. And this looks like this might be laggy too. Something. Oh, okay, yeah. Basically not useful. but I'll talk anyway. If you wanted to deal with Cody's jumps on Kareem and didn't have a good idea of how to do it, if you're far enough out that you don't think your other stuff is going to work, neutral jump heavy kick is among your better options. For some reason, the way that their hurt boxes interact means that while she does not necessarily win out, she can beat Cody's zoning jump with it sometimes, and most of the rest of the time either trade or cause a specific type of air reset that means that he basically doesn't get to do anything. It's also a good tool against most of his moves when he is just outside that range where she's controlling neutral and wants to get in. Meaning that to her this matchup is very similar to playing against Boxer, except that the opponent has a projectile. But Cody's projectile is not one of the more difficult ones for Kareem to deal with anyway, so mostly this comes down to how well can the Cody player handle their B trigger once they get it. To the point where I find myself wondering whether or not his V skill 2 is the optimal V skill for this matchup, because she's not really going to let him get a lot off of the other one.
You lose.
It's that weird type of lag. I'm not really sure if it would be worth continuing it. So it looks like we're dealing with instability on that end somehow. But looks like, in fact, Cosmolf is gone, so I think we're at the end of our stream, actually, and possibly the end of our lounge.
It's go time.
So we're going to call it a night for now, I think, and you can join us tomorrow for what will probably be Guilty Gear. And on Wednesday, I actually expect there to be Sandbag Casuals. We should have Kame House on Thursday as always, and I expect there to be just guidance content for Helena Bot on Friday. If you're not interested in any of that and you are a Street Fighter fan primarily, then of course you can join us next week, Monday, for another Mish-Mashing Battle Lounge. This has been Rillian, along with Kanzuki Dynasty for Team 2MK. Look out for when we are streaming on our Twitter, 2_MK_FGC, and check out our updated Claw bot along with all our other bots at 2-mk.org.
It's go time.